great to be with you tonight. We're catching us towards the end of a series in a season called Epiphany, wherein historically Christians have taken a look at the ways in which Jesus extends light and peace to all people. So beyond just the Jews who he came to initially as a Jew, he also came to the Gentiles. He kind of turned everything on its head and surprised a lot of people by coming and extending light and peace to even them, which means that Jesus brings light and peace to you tonight, and that's what we get to celebrate in the season of Epiphany. We've gone over the past several weeks different populations that Jesus has extended light and peace towards. So we've talked about Jesus' posture towards the poor, Jesus' posture towards women, Jesus' posture towards the outsider, Jesus' posture towards the rich was Jason Jans, one of our board members, his topic last week. If you missed last week, or if you were participating in the toxic masculinity of the Super Bowl, I was here talking about women. So if thank you, appreciate that. Smattering of applause from the three people that were here that night. If that was just too easy, I had to put it in there. We do have a podcast, so you can listen to the ones that you missed. We just found the drive that we save all those on, so it's not quite updated, but you're going to see those in the coming weeks. So you can go to tsgeng.org/sermons to see more about that. Tonight, we have the distinct privilege to talk about Jesus' posture towards people who are experiencing chronic sickness or chronic disability. I realize, by the way, as I say that I am going to be unintentionally exclusive, unintentionally narrow, and unintentionally whatever the opposite of nuanced is as I talk about this tonight. It is a difficult and broad topic, and in fact, I will probably be talking about several different populations, and I will use shortcut language, like something like chronic disability, to encompass all of those populations. And that's unfair to people who are experiencing disability or delay or illness of some kind. So I want you to know that if you're experiencing those things, you might feel somewhat disappointed in the way that I'm referring to, and I apologize for that. If you know somebody who's experienced that or you work alongside somebody who's experiencing that, I want you to know that I am not going to do justice to those populations tonight. But tonight, just like every other week in this series, the goal is actually for us to see what Jesus' posture is towards those populations. The goal tonight, as it was every other time during this series, is to talk about Jesus' character, his posture, his approach to different populations. So that is our goal, is to highlight what Jesus is doing, what Jesus does extend to those folks. In order to get a little bit of credibility on this topic, I decided to talk to a few people in our church who are experiencing disability themselves, chronic pain, chronic fatigue, chronic illness, those things, throughout the week, and I learned a lot. And I thought about who I could maybe bring up here to talk a little bit more about it, and I landed on the person you know as our worship director, Hosanna Decino, to talk a little bit about that, because you may or may not know this, but in addition to being extremely musically talented, for the past several years she has worked exclusively with people who've experienced delay or disability. And so, Hosanna, if you want to come up here, I'm just going to ask Hosanna a couple quick questions. You can maybe stand right here. That might be better. Anyway, because she knows a lot more about these populations than I do, because you work with them all the time. You have for the past 6 years, right? Is that all right? Right. So I'm gonna rip through like 4 quick questions. She's gonna answer them quickly, and then we're gonna move right along. All right. So the first is, would you tell us a little bit about your experience with people who are chronically disabled or delayed?
Yes. So I kind of stumbled into the job of caregiving about 6 years ago. There's a whole story behind it, but I basically ended up working with a young woman who had cerebral palsy for about 6 years. And then along the way, I picked up other jobs. So I took care of people with autism, Rett syndrome, and a lot of it was interacting with the families and trying to figure out who was going to care for them at a certain time. So
that's great. So in a court of law, we would call her an expert witness. Okay, that's how that goes. So what are some of the common fears, pains, and insecurities that these populations experience?
I initially went into thinking, well, it's probably just the disability itself, but I was very wrong. It is very complex. It's obviously the disability itself, but also financial struggles, the whole family, feeling outcast or rejected or misunderstood. There's just the problem of access and feeling like the world itself doesn't, it's not made for you. And then, of course, there's institutions, there's school, there's even the medical field. There's all kinds of obstacles for them.
Thank you. Hosanna, in your experience, how have Christians extended light and peace to these populations, and how have we failed to do so as well?
So I obviously met a lot of other caregivers. Most of them were family members. I was the only person that didn't have a direct connection with somebody that had a disability. But for those who actually went into the field, a lot of them were Christians. Actually, most of them were Christians. Unfortunately, my experiences in church, when it's kind of like a big group, what I saw was that they were treated pretty much the same as elsewhere in society. And so a lot of the time, there's like this weird misunderstanding that people who have a disability are innately inspiring. And it seems like a good thing to think, but it's actually not, because a lot of people would approach Ashley, my friend, and they'd be like, you're just so inspiring. You're so beautiful. I can't believe you're smiling. As if she didn't have a right to do that, like it's some amazing, astonishing thing that she is outside, And it was really insulting. And we actually had this happens all the time. People would come up and pray for her for healing without asking, without invitation, and would make her feel extremely uncomfortable. And it just would bring just attention on this one thing about her that she was actually really used to. And she would tell me all the time, I just wish that people would not treat me that way. And so unfortunately, I think there's still a lot of education that needs to happen within the church. But,
yeah, I think you've heard you say before that Christians tend to be really involved in working with this population from a job or occupational standpoint, but when it comes to just our everyday lives, we're not really that involved. We don't really do much, or what we do maybe is more harm than good.
What I noticed, it's kind of like I'll do my piece by saying hi to them, or be like, you're pretty, or you're so fun. But it's always that just one-time feel-good thing where, like, I feel like I did something good. And honestly, all these families that I met, they don't have help. They don't have respite care. They don't have breaks. They don't have financial help or vehicles or whatever they need. And there's a huge gap in their needs. So
yeah, we tell people approach us all the time as foster parents and tell us that we're saints, which is hilarious. And then we're like, thank you, and also, could you help us, please? Because we're dying, So, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
One last quick question here. In your mind, what is Jesus' posture towards the chronically disabled or delayed? And then here's the kicker, and this one's a tough one. Why not, in your mind, why not always healing? Why isn't that always his posture towards them?
Yeah, I've struggled with that question a long time, not just because of the people that I've been around, but I've seen a lot of hurt in any sense, whether that's sickness or psychological difficulties or financial difficulties. There's an easy fix. God, why don't you just heal them? And so when I first started working with Ashley, I think out of my ignorance and good intention, I prayed by myself, like, God, heal her. Like, there could be like a better thing for her than to be healed. And then about a year in, it finally hit me after the dozenth time that somebody came up to her and would talk to me instead of her, or would say, wow, she's like really well behaved. Or, I don't know, they would be like, oh, you just seem really smart for someone like you. And it's just things that are really patronizing. And I would see this so many times that I first thought was just, there's just the random anomaly of a person that is mean or just rude or ignorant. But it happened so much that I finally realized, okay, no, like, their disability isn't the problem. It's the way that we as a society treat them. If we treated them well, if we would, treat them as people, if we would let them, learn what they want to learn in schools, and if we would make places accessible for them, so many of the pains and frustrations and inconveniences of having a disability would actually just disappear. And so I think that the first step needs to be, like, our hearts need to change towards that community.
It's fantastic. Thank you so much. Would you guys give Rosanna a hand, please? As I was preparing for this week, there were a few different stories that were really helpful, but I spent a lot of time in the Gospels looking at Jesus' posture and approach just in these narratives towards this population, and I came across a really big problem. He continues to heal people in the Gospels, and that's problematic because that doesn't always seem to be the case in our day-to-day lives, right? I know a lot of people who are experiencing disability or delay or illness of some chronic level of some kind, and they are not experiencing healing, which some people would chalk up to a lack of faith or a lack of maybe a lack of belief in what God can do or a lack of connection with God. But it seems to be that people who have really strong faith are still not healed from their disability. But in the recordings of Jesus' work, it seems to be very, very frequent. In Luke alone, there are 13 recorded healings throughout the book of Luke. And so I felt that was be a bit of a problem. And so I spent a little bit of time looking through these stories, and I want to look through one in particular along with you tonight and talk a little bit about Jesus' actual approach and posture. I'm going to talk a bit about what healing actually looks like. We're going to be in Luke chapter 6, starting in verse 6. It goes like this. On another Sabbath, he went into the synagogue and was teaching. A man was there whose right hand was shriveled. And the Pharisees and the teachers of the law were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus. So they watched him closely to see if he would heal on the Sabbath. But Jesus knew what they were thinking and said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Get up and stand in front of everybody." So he got up and he stood there. And Jesus said to them, "I ask you, which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or evil, to save life or to destroy it?" He looked around at all of them, and then he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He did so, and his hand was completely restored. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law were furious and began to discuss with one another what they might do to Jesus. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Although one reaction only is recorded in this story, I think that there were probably at least three groups of people there. Okay, so it's going to require a bit of conjecture. Stick with me. There were probably a group of people that had been following Jesus around because they were curious about what he was going to do next. If you can imagine Jesus kind of wandering around Inglewood, like teaching in different places, interpreting graffiti in a cool way, or like showing up at city council meetings and yelling, whatever, you would start to rearrange your Saturday to be around this guy, okay? So there were probably people kind of following around going like, what is he going to do next? We want to see. And when they saw someone healed, they were probably like, wow, that's really cool. That gives me hope, and I'm excited, and I have more enthusiasm for following this guy around. The second group were probably people like this guy himself, and then people like him who had some sort of infirmity or disability or some sort of physical challenge in their life, and they were given great hope and experienced great gratitude when they saw this man healed. And that was probably their reaction. But neither of those two reactions are actually recorded in the text. This guy's hand was healed right in front of everybody, and Luke does not even record his reaction. Rather, it's the third reaction that is the only reaction that is actually recorded. And it's the reaction of the Pharisees, the teachers of the law, the societal elite, the people who had it all together and the people who were right all the time, at least in their own minds. These people get their reaction recorded. In fact, the entire story is actually about them, weirdly. They're watching this happen, and they are actually indignant. They're angry. They're enraged. They are so upset that this man was healed because of when he was healed and how he was healed. You see, Jesus was very intentional in when he healed this man. He was very intentional. It's not the only time he does this. There's several times where he walks into the synagogue on the Sabbath and he heals somebody. And before he does so, there's this little indication. He kind of looks around and makes sure he has everybody's attention. He heals that person. And then that person sort of fades into the background of the story because it's really never about just that one person. You see, as I've been reading through these texts and as I've been reading through these stories about Jesus healing, I've realized this sort of plot twist to all of these stories. It was sort of this epiphany moment, if you will, and you should. A light bulb went on. It was Hosanna and I were in my office talking about this, and I realized, oh my gosh, there's something else, an entirely second layer to these stories. There's two healings that take place in each of these stories. It's never just the person who is healed of their physical infirmity. It's also everybody else that gets to dip their toe into healing. See, Jesus shows up and he heals this man's hand, which would have been an amazing thing, especially if you think about a hand that is shriveled. Jesus had to add like bone and sinew and fingernails and skin and make it mobile and make it useful again. And that was an amazing thing, but it's likely that man had gotten used to having only one working hand, right? So going back to something that Hosanna said, most people who experience disability for a long period of time actually get used to some sort of way of life that includes that disability or illness. That's not to minimize at all the challenge that they face. I don't mean to do that in any way. But rather to say they learn how to function in society or as best they possibly can or in their family, considering their disability or the challenge that they face. This man had probably gotten more or less used to that. What the man had not gotten used to, what the man could not have gotten used to, was the fact that society was his greatest burden. See, the hardest thing for someone with a disability isn't usually their disability, it's everyone else. Oftentimes, society is the greatest burden on anyone experiencing a physical challenge or who is differently abled. It is our systems and our structures that in many ways don't allow people to live a normal life. They aren't accommodated for. And so there's these people, the religious elite, the people who are experts in the law, the people who teach this stuff, and they have a way of living. They have a way of life that they know very well from knowing the law. And Jesus comes in and turns it on its head. Jesus comes in on the Sabbath and changes their understanding of the Sabbath, and they're upset because they're going, wait a minute, Jesus, I don't know if you've noticed, but we've been following the law to the T, and we're doing pretty well. Like, things are going great from us. We're really popular. We're really important. We have the say in all these different circles. We have all the privilege and power and authority and prestige in the world, and it's because we're following all the rules. You can't come in here and break the rules because that messes everything up for us. And what Jesus is doing is slowly but surely chipping away at the societal systems and structures that were not accommodating to this man. You remember the woman who was hemorrhaging a couple of weeks ago that we talked about? She was not allowed to participate in worship or any sort of religious practice for 12 straight years. And Jesus comes in and turns that on its head. Heals not just her, but the people around her because they see her differently. They accommodate her differently. They interact with her completely differently. So there were two healings. The first is the person with the shriveled hand. Again, this is the kind of healing that we typically associate with the word healing. But it's a limited and short-sighted version of healing, even if it's the one that we want for so many people. It's not a bad thing to want it, but it's not all there is when it comes to healing. The second kind of healing is the societal system that has been oppressing the person with disability. That system begins to go through healing, and that's a slow process. Jesus chips away at that over and over and over again. It's a slow churn, and we're still in that today. Things are not perfect here in the United States of America for somebody experiencing disability. We're far from it, right? Somebody with a mental delay or somebody with a physical disability, somebody with a chronic illness, chronic fatigue, chronic pain, people who experience these things experience challenge on a daily basis. And Jesus extends something to them that goes beyond sometimes the immediate healing. He extends to them accommodation. Accommodation is a form of healing that stretches far beyond the differently abled, far beyond the person experiencing challenge. We say around here a lot that we are joining God in what he's already doing in the life that you're already living. What he's already doing in the life you're already living. The premise there is that God's already working all around you, here in Inglewood, at your job, in your family, in your home, in your kids' schools, wherever. God's working there. And it's really a matter of us seeing what that is and then stepping in and joining him in that work, right? Well, that means that when God is doing something systemically, or when God is doing something on a structural level in our society, we should notice that and step into that. We oftentimes fall back on the Americans with Disability Act in 1990 and say, well, we have accommodations for people who are experiencing disabilities. But the fact that that exists is not the same thing as it being enforced, right? And so if you should think about the institutions that you're a part of and even your home itself and thinking, how am I accommodating? Because in accommodating somebody who experiences a challenge, you're joining God in the work that he's doing because that is the kind of work that God is up to. I'll give you an example. We're right here on Acoma. This is the street that we're on. And then if you come over here at the corner, this is Eastman that runs east-west. Okay. And our family lives on Eastman and Bannock. Okay. So this is Acoma, and then goes Bannock and Cherokee and Delaware and Elodie. Eastman goes all the way to Cushing Park and dead ends into a parking lot in Cushing Park, okay? And on the way, you've got Bishop Elementary School, there's Cushing Park, and a lot of people use that as a pretty common thoroughfare, okay? A lot of people use that to get to the train station, use that to get to Cushing Park, like I said, the Platte River Trail, Santa Fe, Bishop Elementary School. A lot of people walk, ride bikes, skateboard, drive, whatever, back and forth on that road. And we have a little porch on the south side of our house, so we get to see people walking back and forth there all the time. In fact, we sit out there all the time, and that's how we get to know most of our neighbors, is waiting for them to walk by, and then we stop them and interrupt what they're doing and say hello to them. It's been a great way to get to know neighbors. A handful of you from our church live over in that area, kind of west of here, off of Eastman in some way, and so you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about in just a minute. Up until recently, at the corner of Eastman and Cherokee, 3 of the 4 curbs were like 90-degree angle curbs, okay? Where the sidewalk ended, instead of ending in a ramp where it is supposed to, it ended in a 90-degree angle curb, which may not sound like that big of a deal to you. It's like just a different angle on the sidewalk as everywhere else. Well, to me, before we had children, I probably would have thought the same thing. But when you're hauling kids around, they are usually in something that has wheels on it, okay? A wagon, a stroller, tricycle, scooter, whatever. And we go to Bishop to play, or we go to Cushing Park to play, and when we were trying to get there, we were always on the sidewalk, and we always had to, for a kid on a tricycle, a 90-degree angle curb is like a precipice, okay? And it's just like, hey, good luck, here we go. And they just would kind of fall off of it and then get back on the trike and like cross the street. It was not safe. It was not easy. It was extremely inconvenient. And I can't tell you how many times I crossed that and I thought to myself, how much harder would it be if I was in a wheelchair? In fact, it would be unnavigable. It would be actually impossible to navigate this part of my neighborhood in a wheelchair. And that was troublesome to me. And I actually asked a neighbor about it. And one of my neighbors, Robin, who's a physician, said, she's very familiar with the ADA and the rules involved in that. She goes, yeah, I've been fighting this for 10 years. For a decade, she had been trying to get Public Works to come out and change that particular intersection, and nobody had done it. She had gone to city council and said something during public comment about that particular intersection. So she said, good luck. I have gotten nowhere with it. Well, last year, City of Inglewood created an app where you can post pictures of things that are wrong, and then they will hopefully come and fix them. I, wishful thinking, posted a picture on the app and said, hey, you should come fix this thing. Not thinking anything would happen. I got like a robo reply that said, thank you for your submission, and that was it. Well, a couple months after that, I came outside of our house to come to work, and I started walking this way, and I glanced down the street, and I saw a bunch of heavy equipment down there. And I figured they were just fixing a pipe or something. And I came to work, and I came home that night, and Julie had seen it too. And she said, hey, did you see the tractors and whatever down there? And I was like, yeah. She goes, did you think they're working on the sidewalk? I was like, I doubt it. Don't get your hopes up. The next day, I took a train downtown to do something, and I came back late that night. It was like 9 o'clock at night. I'm walking back from the train station, and there's plastic over those 3 corners. And I was like, I wonder what it is. So I went and peeked under the plastic. And sure enough, right under the plastic were these 2, these beautiful ramps going in either direction, perfectly graded with the red thing with the bumpy things on it right at the end. I was ecstatic. I yelled something in the middle of the street at 9 o'clock at night, which is not uncommon on Eastman in the middle of the night. So my neighbors probably didn't think anything of it. I was so ecstatic. I was like, oh my gosh, we can get to the park, and my neighbors who are experiencing disability can get around more easily. This is great. This is progress. This is the work of God for the sake of people who are challenged right here. And I was like, if we don't celebrate this, then it's a lost cause. If we don't celebrate this, then we're really not excited about some of the things that I genuinely think God is doing here in this community. I got the privilege of being on the design advisory group for Bishop Elementary School, which I don't know if you've noticed, but is just a flat surface right now. They demoed the whole thing. They're rebuilding it, which is super exciting. And I was in a meeting with all the people who were involved in making the decisions on what the actual, end product would look like. And at one point, we were talking about accessibility because we were like, well, it's a small lot, so the Bishop's going to have to be built up instead of out, and 2 stories. And somebody, we were all getting excited, oh yeah, so we should have ramps and we should have elevators and lifts and all this stuff. And we were going back and forth on that, and we all thought we were being really progressive and oh yeah, we want to make sure we accommodate anybody who has any challenges whatsoever. So we're next to every staircase, we want a ramp. And somebody just quietly at one point was like, you could just have ramps. We were like, what do you mean? No, you could just have ramps. You don't need stairs and ramps next to them. You could just have ramps. And in my mind, I was like, oh my gosh, the architect is there. No kidding. What? I never thought of this before. I'm our minds are blown. This person was like, yeah, instead of just having the whole class go up the stairs over here and then one person on the ramp over here, just have a ramp and everybody's on the ramp. It was incredible. I'm convinced that these small tweaks in the way that we see our neighborhood and we see our community are actually ways in which God is slowly but surely changing the system and the structure within which we live for the sake of people who are experiencing challenge. We have the opportunity to join God in what he's already doing in the life that you're already living, and that happens with the literal dirt that's underneath our feet. This might be the weirdest sermon application that you've ever heard, but stick with me. What if you took a walk this week around your neighborhood, around your house? I was just thinking today, I was the only way to get into our house is to go over stairs. That's a problem. You have to go up to at least 2 stairs to get into our home. That's a problem for our hospitality. That's a problem for our accommodation. I think that Jesus is in the business of extending accommodation. He's in the business of extending a societal and structural healing that goes beyond the immediate infirmity or the immediate challenge that somebody faces. And we get to join him in that work of accommodation. So take a walk around your work, around your home, in your neighborhood, and pay attention. You'll notice, by the way, in Inglewood that on the north side of any block, for like a week or two after the snowstorm, it's just solid ice on that sidewalk. That is a problem for our neighbors who experience challenge. Call code enforcement. They would be very upset if I said that. There's like 3 of them, and they get like 400 submissions a month. But call them anyways, we need to be advocates, and I think we get to join God in that work when we do that. I'm going to close this in prayer tonight, but before I do that, I want to invite you to consider grabbing your kids from any of the classes to come in and join us for communion after I finish praying. Would you join me in prayer? Heavenly Father, thank you for an opportunity to gather together yet again and to take a look into your word and see what you have to say and see the ways that you've approached people groups that maybe are different than us or maybe the same as us. I pray, God, that as we leave here tonight, that we would feel as though you have, at least in your love and in your grace, accommodated each of us, even in the challenges that we face. And then beyond that, God, I pray that we would see the societal and systemic ways that you are creating accommodation. I genuinely think that is the way that you are approaching us, no matter what sort of experiences we have. So I pray, God, that our church would be advocates for that. We would be champions for people who are maybe overlooked by other parts of society. We love you, Lord, and we pray these things in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.